India at 75 from the eyes of an administrator. Namaskar, friends. In its eventful journey post independence, India had on the one hand seen various ups and downs, and on the other hand had achieved and sometimes missed several milestones. At any given point of time, many centuries coexist in India, and given its vastness, that makes administering it an unique experience. I belong to the generation born in free India that had grown with the country post independence. We have encountered many situations except directly going through the pangs of partition. Even listening to those stories was horrifying. The partition of India, either by the design or a conspiracy, has left an unfettered wound on the future of subcontinent. It still haunts us in the form of religious polarization. In this background, someone having spent almost 4 decades in the public service as an administrator out of over 6 decades of coming into this world, I feel privileged to share with you a part of India's journey at 75. It is not possible to cover everything, but my endeavor is to cover whatever I can in an objective manner. During these years, one had seen several changes and witnessed strides made and failures in various walks of life by the country. At present, we in India are passing through a difficult time due to COVID-19 pandemic. It is a grim reminder of inadequacies in our systems, calling for urgent corrective action. I have organized this conversation in the following manner. Salient feature of India's journey of the last 75 years, pressure points, and the last is the way forward. I take this opportunity to remember and pay my respectful homage to all the freedom fighters who got us independence from the British in 1947. While discussing various issues, I would like to emphasize the progress made on two main planks of our freedom movement, namely Swarajya, self-rule, and Surajya, good governance. Yes, indeed, power was transferred from the hands of Britishers to Indians in 1947, but it is an irony. Even after passage of so many years, the core of our administration remains inspired by colonial mindset. One can safely make an observation that attainment of Swarajya had been achieved to a significant extent but not to the fullest level. Insofar other component is concerned, Surajya is still the work in progress. Coming back to our narrative, India is a relatively young nation but an ancient civilization. We possess remarkable religious, linguistic, and socio-cultural diversity unparalleled elsewhere in the world. This diversity is our strength as well as weakness too. Strength as a common thread of Indianness runs across the length and breadth of the country, and weakness as it makes us susceptible for exploitation by the unscrupulous elements. Our economic growth story had been slow but steady in the initial 4 decades, with several internal and external constraints accentuated by the Chinese aggression of 1962 and wars with Pakistan of 1947 1965 and 71, Indian economic growth is taunted as Hindu rate of growth. India opted for middle path, neither capitalist nor communist, post-independence. These years were spent in managing quota, permit, license Raj in the name of guiding both the public and private investment towards so-called gainful and productive areas. For the benefit of millennium children, this was the era of scarcity, from the shortage of food grains to petroleum products. One has to empathize with the people who, for getting certain goods and services which we take for granted today, was tedious. The people needed to obtain a permit in those days for purchasing few bags of cement to get their house repaired. After booking, the waiting period of purchasing a Lambretta scooter was 5 to 7 years. The manufacturer of Ambassador cars, the ultimate symbol of power made in India, did not even think of any improvements for almost 3 decades. Getting a cooking gas telephone connection used to take years. Even for a refill of gas cylinder, one has to stand in long queues and wait for a month. Similarly, most of the goods were under controlled regime. Breaking these queues was possible either approaching through MP, MLAs from their discretionary quota or taking shelter of black market. The scarcity situation of any goods, services, even now brings worst of humanity in our society. Everything was not negative. Let us come to positive side of this period. It was primacy of public sector institutions providing inexpensive but quality education and health services. No doubt, availability and access to these institutions was limited and relatively difficult. I feel proud of myself that I am also product of these public sector institutions. The next wave of institutional development led to unregulated or underregulated proliferation of expensive healthcare and educational institutions in the private sector. Privatization of health and education first started in southern states and later spread to other parts of country. This privatization has twofold impact. First, investment in public sector institutions became negligible, putting them on ventilator, and second, cost of seeking services skyrocketed. On the education front, one more important policy failure was that none of our educational institutions could compete on any count with the best in the world. We also failed to stop exodus to foreign countries of our students not able to get admission in Indian institutions. In the late 70s and 80s, Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh started supplying subsidized rice and other commodities. In some of the states, country-made liquor to poor and vulnerable was also supplied. The number of people getting subsidized commodities was more than the total population number of households in some of those states. On top of it, there are many eligible households which are still waiting for a ration card. Similarly, depending on electoral calculations, most states supply free or concessional electricity and water. Policy flip-flops are also quite common, such as from concessional supply of liquor to complete prohibition, and again back to normal at different points of time. Coming to success stories, food security, nuclear, space, solar power, poverty alleviation, and telecom were some of the sectors making country proud. Tremendous good work had been done by individuals in various fields, but making systematic changes remains a big challenge in India. Now coming to pressure points. What are the pressure points? The population of India is going to be the biggest pressure point that can negate all our efforts. Let us see some numbers. At the time of independence, population of India was 36 crore as compared to the global population of 256 crore. In 2020, India's population has become 137 crores as against global population of 780 crores. During last 7 decades, the global population had increased 3 times in comparison to 3.8 times growth in India's population. India is also a resource scarce nation as 2.4% of the global land area supports 16.7% of the global population. The demographic dividend in a country like India can only be obtained with high quality and productive human resources that requires lot of effort to be done in the country. More so, in India, even to maintain the same standards of quality of life, one has to do relentless work in view of growing numbers and higher expectations of people. Providing gainful employment and livelihood is going to be a bigger challenge, having direct impact on law and order and maintaining peace and tranquility in the society. There are various types of disruptions, both artificial and natural. They are going to happen. In the years to come, technology itself could be a big disruption. Technologies such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things are going to cause unprecedented disruptions for both blue collar and white collar jobs. For example, robotic surgeries, computer-aided design, manufacturing, 3D printing will take a heavy toll on the job sector is concerned. What is the way forward? First and foremost is whatever money is spent by public sector, either at the local bodies or state government or the national government, we should improve quality of public expenditure. This could be done by following 4 or 5 points. A. Avoid cost and time overruns in all our projects and schemes. Make people responsible and accountable for any aberration. B. Providing requisite financial, technical and human resources. That is the biggest lacuna. I will give one example which you will find very hilarious and maybe sometimes one feels like crying. A project of rupees 7,500 crore has to be completed in 5 years with annual allocation of 75 crores. What is the fun? With the normal cost itself it will take 100 years, and whatever money in next 4-5 years is spent, that is complete wastage. C is monitoring of various schemes and activities. D. Fixing responsibility and accountability. E. Instead of input-outputs based systems, we should work on outcome-based systems. Again, I will take an example of primary education. The input-based system talks about numbers and ratios of students, teachers, while the outcome-based system emphasizes on the level of proficiency in reading, writing and mathematical skills, what is known as 3 R's, acquired by number of students. Second point is we should focus on our individuals, institutions and processes, as governance is a function of these three variables. When it comes to election, we should select the individuals with character, capability, caliber and good conduct for various electoral posts. Similarly, selection of individuals should be made in a transparent and honest manner. Institutions also need to develop trust and integrity. They should reinvent themselves to restoring people's confidence and to ensure rule of law and faith in the system. Last but not the least is processes. Processes should be result oriented, humane and simple, designed to gain the trust of the people, and it should lead to ease of living to the people. Unshackle the system. Innovate, improvise and improve. We should have only a red list of things not to do. The rest of the things should be as per the guidelines, and people should follow those guidelines without any approval process. Suppose anybody violates those guidelines, due action should be taken without any blinking of eyes. Fourth point is a well-prepared society to meet challenges. Challenges could be internal and external, local to global, various types of challenges, nuclear, chemical, biological and internet security, cyber security, social changes, climate change, which is going to increase the adverse climatic effects both in terms of intensity and frequency. Last but not the least is to pay requisite attention on already stressed environmental resources, namely air, water and land resources. All these things require paradigm shift in our approach. To conclude, I will say following. People are the real masters in a democracy. They deserve a responsive and an accountable system of governance. Both elected and selected representatives are meant to serve the people and improve the quality of life of citizens. Any system is as good or bad as the individuals managing it. And last, people-centric governance is only possible in a country with governance-centric people. If citizens don't become responsible and vigilant, Surajya will continue to remain elusive. Thank you.